Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to ask if you are not currently muted, if you will go ahead and mute yourself so that we don't get feedback. I'm also going to ask if you will on your, if you are on your computer, if you could rename yourselves or make sure that it's showing your name. This is just an extra security measure we're taking. If you're not sure how to do that, you can go up and there's 3 dots together on your picture. If you can hover over your picture, you'll see where it says mute or unmute, and then next to it is a 3-dot menu. If you'll click that 3-dot menu, you'll see where you can rename yourself and just type in your name. That way we can see who all's on the call with us today. We still have a few more people that are joining. There we go. For those of you that have just joined us, what we're asking is if you'll go ahead and make sure that you have renamed yourself, especially if you're on your computer, so that we can see your name. If you're not sure how to do that, just hover over your picture and you'll see up in the top right corner a little 3-dot menu. And if you'll click on that menu, you'll see an option that drops down for renaming, and you can rename for yourself. That way we can just see who's on the call with us, and we can make sure that everyone that's here we want is an Oklahoma teacher that's here for helping us to learn and to for the good of all. There we go. Yeah, we still got more time. We still have a few more people joining, so I'm just letting kind of everybody join before we get started. Did everybody have a wonderful Easter break? Going somewhere fascinating like your living room or your kitchen? All right. I have put on the in the chat box our agenda, link to our agenda. I put it on there again. Yes, Ginger, it was definitely a different day for us also. I still have kids at home, and their biggest concern is if the Easter Bunny was coming to see us or if he was on quarantine as well. So he managed to make it to our house, and now we have way too much chocolate and not enough places to run off energy. All right.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
Yes, I'm Miriam Owen. Do you want us to give a total different name or a nickname
No,
or something?
what we're trying to make sure of is that it's just a name, your name. We just want to make sure that we have your name.
Oh, my name. Okay.
We've had some issues with somebody breaking in and using not having a name at all, and it caused some issues for some other people that we just don't want to repeat. So.
I do have a question also. If we've renamed our screen, our name, we can still see ourselves though, correct?
Sure.
But
yeah.
what you see is just our name.
It depends. If you have your camera and your video on, down in the bottom left corner, you'll see where it says video. I can hit stop video. If there's a red line through that little video camera, all we see is your name. If there's not a red line, we see your picture there, and then your name is kind of in that bottom left corner of your picture.
Okay, would you prefer to just see the name? Because I see some screens where it's just people's names.
I'm honestly going to share my screen. It's not going to make a lot of difference.
Okay.
We're just making sure we know who's with us today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Not a problem. All right. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to put this agenda link in here.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound. You have not.
There we go.
Melissa, you are muted.
One ticket to Saigon, monsieur. You take off from Le Bourget at 11:15. You arrive at Istanbul at 12 noon tomorrow. After a 3-hour stop over there, you will continue on to Saigon via Bombay.
There we go. Sorry about that. Everybody good? And can everybody see my screen? Okay, Brenda and Timmy, you might kind of keep an eye on our waiting room because I know we have people still coming in. And
We want to still go ahead and want us to go ahead and shut her down at 5 after.
yes, please. And we currently have 299 people on this call, so there's really only room for one more person. So, all righty. Timmy, are you able to see my screen? Am I sharing my screen? All right, thank you. So here's our agenda that we're working on today. And, you know, as with everybody else, we're still figuring out this whole distance learning thing. So thank you for your patience with us as we're working on that. My name is Melissa Algrim. I'm the Director of Reading Sufficiency, for those of you that don't know me. We're joined on the call today with Timmy Spangler. You heard her voice just a moment ago. She's our Director of Instructional Materials and Library Sciences, and she also helps tremendously with RSA. Also, Brenda Chapman, our Social Studies Director, is on the call and is also another huge help when talking about RSA and helping students with literacy. So we're going to help you today with just understanding any updates to any guidance that we have. There was some guidance that was released at the March 30th meeting, and it is on the RSA coordinator and teacher page of the OSDE website. I'm going to go right there real fast so that you can see what that page is. This page, and you can find the guidance right up here at the top. This was updated and released this morning with updated FAQs that we're going to review today. We also talked a little bit about a documentation form, and we'll look at any updates to that as well. And you can find that right here on the RSA coordinator webpage as well, but it's also linked in our agenda. Okay. If you are not sure about if you are receiving any updates for RSA, we have started trying to get a more regular newsletter going for RSA. To make sure that you're getting those update notifications, be sure you are signed up for that newsletter. I have talked to a few people that I know are signed up for that newsletter that said that they're not getting it. Sometimes district firewalls will block OSDE emails. So please make sure you might check your junk mail, your spam, then you might even talk to your IT department to make sure that there's not a block on those OSD pages. If you're not sure where to go for signing up for newsletters, if you will go to the main OSDE page, just sde.ok.gov, scroll down to the very bottom and you'll see where it says newsletter sign up. You can just enter in your email address. And we'll hit go and see if it decides to take us there. And then it'll confirm your email address and you'll have a whole host of newsletters that you can sign up for. If you'll scroll down, you will find the Reading Sufficiency right here. You just put a check mark in front of that one, anything else that you want, and submit, and you'll start getting those newsletters. Okay. Because of some of the security issues that I mentioned earlier, we are ensuring that all of our future Zoom meetings are password protected. We will not be putting those passwords on social media. We'll be putting them out through our newsletters. And we'd ask that you not share those on social media as well. Certainly share them. If you've got a colleague that you know needs that, that's perfectly fine if you know that they're supposed to be here. We're just trying to keep out people that have no business being here and causing problems. So in any case. All right, so let's get down to it. Let me delete that. So with our guidance, the overall guidance has not changed from what we talked about on March 30th. We still have our four pathways for promotion. Remember that our first pathway is meeting the RSA criteria on the state test, and that is not being given this year, so that means that that is not really an option. So all of our other students have to work through the other pathways because we normally would have about 80% of our kids on this first pathway. So pathway 2, when we talk about that, that's meeting the screener, the end of year target for the screening assessments. And we've put the links to the guidance right here on this page for you as well. Our good cause exemptions for pathway 3, again, we've spelled those out and what needs to happen for those, as well as pathway 4 for our student reading proficiency team members. I want to spend a little bit of time here looking at our decision tree, however. So in the absence of these OSTP scores, like I said, the OSTP accounted for so many of our students that I know a lot of us are in a panic thinking about what are we going to do for all of these students. So the best way to start doing this is thinking about, first of all, did the student meet the grade level target for the end of year 3rd grade at any time during 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade, that second pathway? If they did, they would be promoted. And this is the documentation that we would need to file at some point. If not, we go down and we consider, did they meet the criteria for any of the exemptions? If they did, we're promoted. We just ensure that they have that documentation and we move forward. Most of the students that would have been met RSA criteria on the state test would also have be meeting the screener assessment. So we think this will account for most of our students, which leaves just these last few that don't account for an exemption or through the screener. That would be students that we do need to have a meeting for our student reading proficiency team. And then we're going to go over this a little bit more in depth in a moment, but just that reminder of that student reading proficiency team meets and looks at the data and decides, is promotion best for the student, or is it best for the student that they be retained in 3rd grade? If we have a unanimous decision to promote, then that student moves on to 4th grade and we promote. If we do not have a unanimous decision, then we retain. Okay, so that's basically our choices that we have under RSA. And this is really not unique to this year, except for the fact that we don't have that OSTP first pathway for us. Okay, Timmy, do you have anything to add just on that quick overview? Nope, okay. All right, so let me come down here. This is really where we've added more information since that March 30th meeting. And I'm going to go through just each section. And I'm sure as you have questions, you're putting those in the chat. And then Brenda and Timmy are helping to monitor that chat and will let us know as we keep moving forward where we might need to kind of stop and clarify any information. So under funding, Superintendent Hoffmeister did announce that we would have increased flexibility with RSA funding for this year to help cover the costs of distance learning. So those could be things such as Wi-Fi hotspots, purchasing technology such as Chromebooks or iPads, or online subscriptions for any online learning that might need to be taking place. There is not any additional funding for RSA. The full amount that was budgeted has already been distributed, but it is important to note that we can carry RSA funds over into next year. I've been asked if there's a certain percentage. There is not. We recognize that many of you had funds set aside for summer school or for professional development that can no longer take place. And rather than having you scramble to try to figure out how to spend money, we'd rather you be able to utilize that money in a meaningful way as the school year gets started. The only cautionary note that we tend to remind people of is that we don't hoard the money over multiple years, because the legislature does ask how that money's being spent. And what we don't want to have to report to them is, oh, it's not, we don't have anything being spent. So, because then they'll start reducing that funding. So it's just important that we're not hoarding that over, but if we have to carry over some in any year, not just this year, it is perfectly fine, because sometimes we have to have some startup funds in the fall to be able to do that. We just know that they're going to be carrying over probably more this year than we would normally see. Okay. Any quick questions so far on funding? Give you just a moment. Okay. All right, then let's move on down here. Academic progress plans and interventions, as we discussed last time. we are not trying to do interventions during this time of distance learning. We already know that the stress that schools as well as families are under is enormous, and trying to work on something such as a evidence-based intervention would be extremely difficult, and we do not want to add on to that stress. So if we're able to provide practice in areas where students can work fairly independently, wonderful. But we'll continue to pick up those interventions when we meet again in the fall. Okay. So as far as finalizing APPs, just enter whatever score we had for the latest score. We all know, when everybody looks at it, that the year 2019, 2020, the APPs are just going to look a little odd, and that's going to be okay. We'll all recognize that because we're all in the same boat. As far as end-of-year testing and reporting, we are not doing end-of-year screening assessments. The issues behind trying to do that equitably are just enormous, and it's something that we can take off of your plates, and so we chose to do that. For the same token, we are also not doing the end-of-year report for RSA this year. While it is wonderful to have that data and looking at a long-term rate of what's going on and how are our students doing, this is something that is able to be taken off of your already overflowing plate this year. So that's what we're doing, okay? So just take that off and don't worry about it. Okay, so talking about promotion. First one is promotion through Pathway 2. We have several, whoop, Timmy?
We have some questions there, so I wanted to stop because they had to do with the APPs.
Let me go back to that, okay.
So I'm sorry, I was trying to write as fast as I could. So there was a question, and if I'm trying to find it, from Sherry McMillan. What if teachers don't have access to the APPs at buildings that are closed?
Okay, perfect question. And one of the things that we want to stress multiple times, we do not need teachers going back into buildings right now. There is nothing that is that important that needs to be done at this point in time that is worth the health risk of going back to the building. So please don't. If these can be taken care of when we return in the fall if we need to, okay? Obviously, that's not what we all want to be doing. We want to get these things taken care of and off of our plate, but there is nothing there's not a deadline that we have to meet right now that is going to cause anybody to have to go back into the building. So if you don't have things with you, if you can't access them digitally, just put it on hold and we'll take care of it in the fall. Okay.
Melissa, there's a couple of funding questions
Yes.
that I know you covered, but I wanted to
Absolutely.
So is money allowable to use funds for hotspots?
Yes, absolutely they are. That's a really important thing that kids need access to.
And I would just want you to say that again. And the other one is, will this year's money be able to be spent on technology through August?
Not through
Yes.
August.
Through this fiscal year ends July 1. I will have to get some further guidance from leadership about extending beyond that. So for right now, the information from superintendent was to extend it for this fiscal year, but we will check into that about August and get back with you, okay?
Melissa, we also have another question about the APP that was, and if we have already started filling out the first documentation, do we need to redo that first documentation with new or less signatures?
No, you do not. It's required that you have documentation. What form you use, we are providing a tool as a help, but it is not required that you use that form. So if you filled out a different one, that is perfectly fine. We just wanted to make sure that you had options for less signatures, and we'll hit that documentation a little more in depth in just a moment. So I do see one other from Byron. If a teacher is retiring now who's going to fill out that APP, if you know you have a teacher that will be leaving, please work with them to say if you can't access those documents now, get whatever information that you need from that teacher who will be leaving, whether it's retirement or for any other reason, so that that can be taken care of in the fall, okay? again, we recognize that this is just definitely an odd year and we're having to be pretty flexible with how that works. Any
Melissa,
other-
there was also one about sharing this information. So this information is now up to be shared with staff.
Yes, this is on the RSA website. So what you're seeing now is the link to the OSDE website right now. So it's already there.
And Melissa, I know this is on the RSA FAQs because we talked about this. We have another one about the DRA that used to be an acceptable good cause exemption. Is actually
It used to be a screener.
yeah,
So-
as pathway 2. Our school chose to give DRAs as an assessment to drive instruction. Would the state consider a DRA as a good cause exemption this year?
I think you're talking about as a pathway 2 for screener, not as an exemption. That is a decision made by the Oklahoma State Board of Education when they approved that list of screeners. DRA was not included on that list. That list went into effect this year. So while that is a really helpful tool for driving your instruction, it does not meet the requirements for promotion through a screener.
Unless they met the end of the 3rd grade benchmark last year with it, then that would be an acceptable pathway 2.
If it was,
If they used it last year and they hit the end of 3rd grade.
yes, when they hit it, if it was the year that it was approved on the approved list, then that would be fine. And we do have that in the FAQs. We had somebody else that said, as a 2nd grader last year, if they met the end of year 3rd grade benchmark, that would have been noted and the parent would have been notified at that time. But is it being used this year? No. Okay.
And DocuSign is okay for signatures?
Absolutely it is. Absolutely. Okay, let me get back to the questions because it looks like some of the questions are starting to wander into areas that haven't addressed yet. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about pathway 2 with our screeners. Remember that this means that this is students who have met the grade level end of year 3rd grade target on the screening assessment. And there's those 7 assessments that have been approved by the Oklahoma State Board of Education. Those are right here: Acadience, Ames Web Plus, Dibbles 8 Fast, iStation, Map Growth, and STAR Reading. Couple of questions that we have received is, does STAR Early Literacy count? Early literacy, they only give those norms for K through 2, so it is not possible to meet the end of year 3rd grade target using STAR on the early literacy test. It has to be on the reading test. Another question I've been getting is about Dibbles Next. Please remember that Dibbles Next now goes by the name of Acadience. So if you're using the paper pencil version of Dibbles Next, that is now the Acadience. Dibbles 8 is now a new test. Okay, I know it gets very confusing. We've had multiple conversations about this. The 2 companies split. Dibbles 8 got to keep the name but made a new test. Acadience got to keep the old test but had to have a new name. So just to kind of be clear on that. Let's see, one of the questions that we have been receiving is, would we consider using the middle of year target for this year, since that was when most students were tested? It is spelled out in state statute that it must be the end of year 3rd grade target. It would require legislative action for us to change that target. So that's something we don't have the power to do. So for students to be promoted through this, they have to meet the end of year 3rd grade target on those screening assessments. Okay, let's try and think. We talked quickly about if we had students that met the end of year 3rd grade target last year in 2nd grade, that we used an assessment that was approved last year but isn't this year. Yes, that is still valid. It was, when they met it, it was approved, and we're not going to take that away from them. And at this point, this does not require approval from a principal or superintendent. It's just they've met this score or they have not met this score. We notify the parent that they've met the score in writing, and we're done. That's all we need to do. Okay, any other questions coming up about the pathway? I know Stacy, as far as do we put in the EOY spot on the APPs, just leave it blank or put in the March score? I would put in your most recent score that you had for that student, whether it was March or January. Knowing that anytime, you might just say when we got this, when it was given, if it was a January score or a March score, so that the school that's coming out just knows what they have. We all are going to have to recognize no one got end of year scores this year. That's just the way it was. But yes, if they met pathway 2, you just need to notify the parents. You don't need to do anything else. You do need to document, however, somewhere in their file, that's how they're being promoted. Okay, so we'll talk about that documentation. We'll deal with 4th and 5th grade here in just a moment. Okay, MAP. Progress monitoring. MAP growth is one of the assessments that was approved by the Oklahoma State Board of Education. So yes. Are there any other questions? And Diane, you asked that great question, and we have a lot of disagreement on how that question would be asked. Her question is, if a 3rd grade student moves in from out of state right before spring break, how would we, what would we do? We have sent that question off to legal for their interpretation, and we are waiting on that answer. So thank you for asking those wonderful questions. All right, let's move on. And if I've missed any questions, Timmy and Brenda, you can holler at me here in just a moment. As I'm moving on to pathway 3 and good cause exemptions, I think the biggest thing I want to stress is please remember that we have 2 exemptions that saw changes this year due to legislative action last year. Senate Bill 601 was passed last spring, and it changed Good Cause Exemption 5 and Good Cause Exemption 6. Those are permanent changes starting this year. They are not unique to this year's COVID issue. It just causes a little more confusion since we've got all these changes at once. Good Cause Exemption 5 now states that any student who is on an IEP or an individualized education program and that would normally take the regular state test, the OSTP, is now exempt from the retention requirement. It no longer requires a previous year's retention. All it states is that the student must be making progress towards their IEP goals. It is up to the individual IEP team to decide what that acceptable progress looks like. Okay. Good Cause Exemption 6 now states that for all students who are not on an IEP, if they have been retained previously in pre-kindergarten for academic reasons, or kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade, one time, that they are now exempt. This no longer requires 2 years of retention. It only requires 1 year of previous retention. The pre-kindergarten specifies for academic reasons because we sometimes will retain a or hold back a pre-K student, redshirting, giving them an opportunity to grow or mature just a little bit. And that's a little bit different situation. This is if we're recognizing that they had some academic reasons that we would have retained at that time. It's also important to remember that a transition class, like a T1 class, is considered a retention year for this purpose. Okay. So those are the 2 changes. The other question that I has about Good Cause Exemption 2 and Good Cause Exemption 5 for students on IEPs that state that they would either take the OAP or the OSTP. Since we're not administering them, those tests, do the exemptions still apply? Yes, they do. They were intended to take those tests. So even though they are not able to, the exemption still would apply for those students. Okay. What are some of the questions, Timmy and Brenda, that we might be getting for that?
They didn't realize you were just discussing things that you had received a lot of calls or emails on, and they thought this was part of the document. So
we have actually 2 pages of this document dealing with just good cause questions, because we get them so frequently that we wanted to be very clear about that. So you'll see several questions that have come in either from the last meeting we had or emails that we're getting. We're just making sure that those are there. So this one is dealing with pathway 3, good cause exemptions. Here's some with OAP. Good cause exemption 3, the alternative assessments. This is another one we've been getting questions on. All of these assessments that have been improved, the ITBS, the SAT-10, or the Terra Nova, are administered through paper pencil. We cannot give those to students if they are not at the building. So this is probably not going to be an exemption that we will utilize this year. We might be able to use this exemption like before school starts if we're able to start seeing kids again. It can also be used for a mid-year promotion. Okay. Let's see. Same thing with portfolios. Use the data that we already collected. Again, the name of the game is trying to reduce that stress. And the requirement of a portfolio would include work that has been completed independently by the student. That's really hard to ensure when we're in this type of situation. If we're able to get back to working with students again, we can complete these portfolios either before school starts or as part of a mid-year promotion requirement. And let's see. And that was just a reminder of the exemptions. Any other exemptions?
We do have a question. Sorry. So just to verify, if OAP, we do not need to have SRPT meetings on them, correct?
That is correct. They automatically, any students that meet any of those exemptions do not require a meeting. It's just a notification they met the exemption and move on. Okay. So I'm gonna, EL students would be, that would be for students that have had less than 2 years of EL instruction can qualify for exemption 1. So I'm going to come back to our decision tree. Remember, the first thing we talked about was our students that might meet that end of year target for the screener. This should be the vast majority of our students. We just put in some kind of notification to parent, they have met this, and we move forward. We don't need to have any kind of meeting for these students. Good cause exemptions are pathway 3. Notify the parents that they've met this. We put some kind of notification in the file, which one they have met, and we move forward. We do not have a meeting with these students either. This should take care of the vast majority of our students. Okay. Sorry, don't look at the screen if it makes you sick when I scroll. All right. Our last pathway for promotion is the student reading proficiency team. Let us stress very strongly, these are meetings that must be held virtually. We should not be asking parents to come up and meet with us in person. We have arranged that documentation. We'll talk a minute how we can do this without having to have parents physically present to sign anything. It's very important that we keep everybody safe, and so we make sure that that can be done. It's also a good reminder that we do not have to have these meetings right this moment if a parent is not able to have a phone call or a virtual call. We can delay this until later on and restrictions are lifted if we need to, as long as we take care of this prior to the start of the 2021 school year. Okay, so I realize that we want to get this checked off of our plates as quickly as possible often, but safety does come first. So make sure that if we cannot hold those virtually, it's fine to delay this. We do not have to have this done immediately. Okay. Some of the questions that have come up is, does everybody have to be present on the meeting? Yes. This is a time, the intention of the student reading proficiency team is for those team members to discuss anything that is going on with that student, any extenuating circumstances that are not covered under the screener or exemptions, and determine what would be best in the best interest of that student. And so everyone needs to be present for that. And for the student reading proficiency team, remember that includes the teacher that taught 3rd grade reading that year, the 4th grade teacher, and the parent or guardian, And then if a reading specialist is available, including that person. It is not expected that administrators be a part of that meeting. Those are the only the 3 required, the 4 if you have a reading specialist if available, is who needs to be on that team. So it is a unanimous decision to promote. So if everyone on the team has to agree that promotion is best for that to happen. If anyone disagrees, the student has to be retained. That means if the parent disagrees with the school and wants to promote and the school says no, the student is retained. If the school wants to promote and the parent says, I want to retain the student is retained. One of the questions that did come up that we've addressed is what happens if the parents disagree? So there's a couple of different situations where this might occur. We might have 2 parents that are together that disagree. One wants to retain, one wants to promote. In this case, both parents have an equal voice. We do not have a unanimous decision to promote, so we have to retain at that point. I know that will be very awkward, but it is, every parent is there. We can't, the parents all both have that equal voice. If the parents are divorced, most of the time in a divorce decree, there is one parent who has been given authority to make educational decisions, even cases of joint custody. So if it's a situation where the parents are divorced and disagree, that would be the question to ask in the divorce decree, who has the authority for educational decisions? That is the person who gets the vote on the team for retention or promotion. Okay. Let's see. I think that was the
I've
biggest.
got some questions.
Absolutely, I knew you would.
All right, so so we only have meetings if they are retention candidates? Question mark.
If they do not meet the screener and they do not qualify for an exemption, then we need to visit we need to have a meeting to determine, do we promote or do we retain? Otherwise, what it does, and I realize it's as much an appearance thing as any, but appearance is important. We are not making the decision and calling the parent and informing them of the school's decision. The parent is a part of this team and needs to be included in those conversations as well. Okay, so that's very important that we keep the parent in that loop. I recognize that the school team is probably having conversations ahead of time. I get that, but what we don't want is just that call to say, hey parent, we've decided to retain your child. That's not how the team is meant to work. And that's usually the calls that I end up getting. And I'll be honest, I'm already starting to get those phone calls from some parents. One other thing to consider is how we approach parents when we are looking at a possibility of retention. Every year I get a few parents that call and says the teacher and the principal both said they don't want to retain my student, but they said the state is making them and they have no choice. I cannot back up any school that's telling their parents that, because that's not true. Okay, there is nothing in the law that says that the school must promote if they don't feel that it's appropriate. So my response to parents that call me with that statement is to go over, here is what the RSA law says, here are what your rights, here is how a student reading proficiency team works, and everyone has that equal voice. So you might, I know what sometimes we hear is not always the same thing as what is said, but it's very important the way we deliver a message like that. Just realizing that the next stop is parents usually call us. And what we do is inform them, this is what the law says. And I hate for any school to be put in that position where it feels like you're not getting backed up. But I do have to make sure that we are following the law. And the law is not requiring us to retain students against when we feel that that's not the best thing. Anything else on the student reading proficiency team?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I figured.
So if we already have an exemption from retention form in the students' files, do we need to complete another
No.
form to document that? All right,
No.
that's a good one.
You have something already in the file that says that this is how that student is being promoted. That's all we need. We don't need to redocument things. We don't need to create extra paperwork. We just need something in there that when that student goes to 4th grade and the school opens up and says, why are they here? They should be able to notice, oh, they're here because they met Exemption 5, or they're here because they met the screener. Okay, even if it's a different school, we need something there where we can find that information.
And this one just needs some verification or some to say yes or no. So if they meet a good cause exemption, we don't have to have a meeting.
Correct. We do not have to have a meeting if they meet an exemption. What
Okay.
needs to happen for a student who has an exemption, and this is spelled out in state statute, is the teacher has to notify the principal that the student has met the requirements of an exemption. The principal must verify that they approve or disapprove that this happens in writing. And then the superintendent must also sign off that they approve or disapprove that this exemption has been met. Now, for purposes of in writing, and that's going to lead us to talking about our documentation. Normally, what we've had done in the past is a document, everybody would sign it. Because of our restrictions of passing papers around, what we have on our form that we have here is a place where a teacher can fill this out. This is a fillable PDF that is located on the State Department website. Excuse me as I scroll down, where all we have to do is check. And we have put on here assurance of approval so that the teacher or person filling out this form can sign it to say, yes, we have received approval. That might mean an email verification. It could be through a text, through a chat box. I know if I were an administrator, I would want my teacher to print out the email and attach it just for safekeeping, or I might keep those in a file and print it when I can get back to the school and use that school printer, so that we have that information right there. On each of these, you'll notice, like under Pathway 3, it states that a record of written approval from the 3rd grade teacher, the principal, and superintendent is required for all good cause exemptions. Okay, that way you know what's required. Pathway 2, it just says that written notification has been provided. Okay, and under Pathway 4, sorry to skip around like that, there is a record of agreement or disagreement from each member of the SRPT. These can be verbal. They do not have to be physical signatures. Okay.
I have a question on 4. They're wanting to know, we are, emphasized capital letters, using good cause for this year? And we've talked about this a lot.
If the student has already through data that they have already completed, through assignments they've already completed, if they can meet good cause for and it was already taken care of prior to the school's dismissal, absolutely use that. My suspicion is that many schools or many students may have started it but still be lacking some of the required evidence. That can be gathered after our distance learning has been lifted. If we wanted to do a late summer school or a late little boot camp beforehand, or part of their mid-year promotion. Okay.
Melissa, we have a couple more.
Okay.
Could the reading specialist sign the teacher section so they don't have more people handling paper?
That is correct. So down here at the bottom, if you will have that person, their title or position should be reading specialist. Okay.
Okay, the other one was, is a 504 the same as an IEP good cause exemption?
It is not. A 504 is a completely different legal designation and does not meet the requirements of an IEP. So a 504 is not included in RSA legislation.
If we have parents who do not answer their phone or don't have internet access, could we notify them through mail?
As far as notifying them of exemptions or of the second pathway, yes, you certainly can. As far as student reading proficiency team meetings, we all know that there's going to be occasions where we just cannot get a parent on the phone, just like we would for an IEP meeting. Document those attempts and keep track of that. I would use the same methods that you use for IEP notifications of not being able to get a parent in, okay? And again, remember that we can hold off if we need to on that SRPT until the very end. Oh, I know why somebody asked about Good Cause 4. This is not highlighted because it's not fillable. I recognized that at about 5:30 this morning when I noticed. It's the website is getting updated, so this will be hyperlinked to be able to fill that in. I apologize, I didn't catch that when I was working on it last night. So
Okay, here's a couple more. What if we had a meeting in February to tell the parents about everything the child's progress? It was decided by the team the child would be retained unless he passed the test. They have not passed the screener, nor have an exemption. Do we need to meet again?
I would not think so. If we had, in a normal year, when we had taken a test, yes, I would. But for this year, because it is so odd, no, I think we're fine. The only thing is keep track. If the parent suddenly decides to do a switch, then what we might do is go ahead and set up that final meeting. Just to review, nothing really has changed. That way but I wouldn't think that you would need to arrange that. You've already talked to them.
Okay, here's a couple of clarifications. So this form is needed on every student, even though we have their APP filled out.
Some type of form is, or some type of documentation is needed for each student of how they were promoted. This form would be one way that you could do that, where we've tried to give you what's legally required in the most minimal way possible. But I know many of you have contacted me saying that you have taken a different form or you've already done that. That's perfectly fine. Please go ahead and use that. You do not need to recreate just to use this form. But there does need to be documentation in their file of how they were promoted or if they were retained, thinking about if students move or you have a new teacher, they need to be able to lay their hands on that information. We will also have a third grade promotion retention report this coming fall where we'll be gathering that information as well. So we'll want to be able to kind of keep track of that.
And one more time, does the superintendent and principal both have to sign?
They have to provide written approval for the good cause exemptions. We have, legal has helped us develop this assurance of approval so that it's saying that the teacher does have some type of written approval, whether it's through a text message, an email, a chat box, something that would accommodate for that, but we don't have to have their signatures on this piece of paper. But that's the only one where the statute specifically states that the superintendent must provide approval are for students who meet good cause or the pathway 3, any of the good cause exemptions. Okay, anything else on that?
I think it's a good time to remind that that's up to the district how that's going to look.
Yeah. So as we kind of whipped through this documentation, do all third graders need documentation? Yes, they need documentation. They don't all need a meeting, but they need some type of documentation, whether you use the form that we have linked to this agenda and on the website, or you use something that has been developed by the district. The district can make that determination as long as something is there that can be recognizable of this is how we chose to promote or retain. And again, how we get signatures on it, we've talked several times. DocuSign is perfectly fine, but even having an email, a text, if it doesn't require written approval, such as a parent's decision, it can be verbal over the phone, and the teacher can, or whoever's filling that out, can just note that Mrs. Algram on February 14th stated her approval on the phone call And that would be that documentation. Okay. Would there be another form for the SRPT meeting? No, this really will, if we can just check this. Again, if a district wants to have a form that they could do that for, that's perfectly fine. But this would be what something similar to this is all that would really be needed for the file to be able to say they were promoted under Pathway 4 and we had some kind of record of agreement. Like I said, if it were me, I would probably have my teacher just do a quick email that we held our SRPT meeting on April 14th at 2 o'clock. This is who attended and what everybody said. And there's our documentation of our meeting. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to require multiple signatures, just the fact that it happened so that we can point to that when somebody says, did we really have one? Yeah, we had one on this day at this time, and this is who was here. Okay. Students using Pathway 4 and retention are the only ones that need to have a virtual meeting, correct? You are exactly right, Jana. Thank you for summing that up so nicely. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions that are coming up? Okay. While we're talking about virtual meetings, I do want to point out that we do have video conferencing considerations or guidelines that have been published on the SDE website. There's also a direct link right here. Some things to consider, both for FERPA compliance, as well as just security of people who are participating on the calls. It's also, not the special education guidance also addresses how to have virtual meetings and documents so that that can be conducted safely as well. So if you are not aware that this is here, this is a very comprehensive document to talk about how we can safely hold these meetings in a very unique way that we are just not used to after this year. So, all right. And then the only other thing on this FAQ, and I don't think we can say this enough, is about school access. If there are documents at the school that need to be checked to determine if we're eligible for a promotion pathway, should we go to the school for those documents? Please do not. We do not want to risk the health or safety of any of our school personnel or students. That is what comes first at this point, at any point, really. If we cannot get to the records digitally, then just wait. We are not under the gun to get this done by the end of May, by the end of April. We have time, and it's okay to wait until later in the summer when restrictions are lifted. If restrictions aren't going to be lifted by that point in time, we will address what we need to, but we're not needing to necessarily deal with this right this moment as much as we might want to if we cannot do it safely. Okay. All right.
Melissa.
Yes.
I have one question, actually a couple, but the person that talked about the 4th grade student wanted to go back to that.
Oh, thank you for that reminder.
I have a question that talks about a student scoring a 392 in December and in February scoring a 300 and wanting to use the last score.
Okay, so that's a question that has come up before, that last one about the 392 is the end of year 3rd grade target for the STAR reading test. So regardless of which assessment we use, if they meet that end of year 3rd grade target at any time during 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade, they are exempt from the retention requirement. So, and we have talked to legal about that. Their interpretation of the statute is that that has to just be met at some point. It does not mean that they still have to be at that target level at the end of the 3rd grade year. So in this case of the example that was given, if we have a student that met the end of year 3rd grade target in October, and then they slid back and are no longer meeting that right now, they still have met that and are eligible for promotion. Now, we still probably are working on helping them with their needs if they're still struggling, but they are not eligible, or they are not required to consider retention at that point. I know one other question that has come up a couple of times too is, what if a student meets an exemption or the screener, but the school wants to retain anyway. In that case, that would be falling under district policies and procedures. So if you had a student that meets, let's say, good cause exemption 5, they have an IEP and they've been making progress on their IEP goals, but the school has decided that they wanted to, they felt that retention would be best. You would follow your district policies and procedures as you would for any other grade level, but you would not be retaining under the Reading Sufficiency Act. Okay. Okay, back to 4th and 5th grade for those students under probationary promotion. I want to come back to our technical guidance, and I want to say when we put this together, I think, oh, those links aren't going to work. I think we only had 1st through 3rd grade. They have to be in the grade level range for 4th grade to be considered taking off of probation. Now, the 40th percentile, which is where we have set that grade level target for all of those, is normally considered that bare minimum sufficiency. Remember, we talked before about sufficiency versus proficiency. We are looking for to have sufficient reading skills in order to be successful. That doesn't always mean that we will be proficient with all of our reading for college and career readiness. So there's still that gap between. So that 40th percentile is generally that bare minimum for sufficiency. That would be a good rule of thumb, that if I'm in October of 4th grade and I'm able to be at the 40th percentile for that time of year, that would be a time to be considered off of probation and not have to continue those meetings. If students aren't able to get to that grade level band, then we need to consider to continue meeting on that student by 4th grade to go to 5th grade. After 5th grade, that student then would be transitioned over to a locally developed plan for whatever intervention would be deemed appropriate. It comes off of that RSA and is turned over to a local level of how do we meet the needs of these students. Okay.
Okay, Melissa, we have a few more.
Okay.
Could students take a screener like star reading sometime this summer?
I would say while we are under the restrictions of distance learning, no, because you're not able to look at that validity. If there's a time where we're able to lift those restrictions and students are able to come back to the school, maybe even in small groups and assess with a teacher, that would certainly be fine. Okay.
We hope that happens sometime.
Sure.
We have, yeah, we have several questions too. Is there a way students could improve their score through distance learning?
Probably the best way is really just through that method of what is it that they were struggling with, and is there a way to provide them some practice that they can do to work on that. I do know that just from what we know about students who struggle with reading at this point in time, that the vast majority of them, it is dealing with decoding skills and an understanding of phonics, and sometimes even that phonemic awareness of being able to manipulate those sounds. So that can be really difficult for a parent to provide instruction in those areas, just because it becomes so technical. But if you have something like, I know there's some of the different programs, if you have access to that where they're practicing those skills, absolutely you're able to do that and give them those opportunities.
Okay, a couple of clarifications on exemptions 4 and 5. Do they need a virtual meeting for 4 and 5?
They do not need a virtual meeting for any of the exemptions.
Okay. There's someone that was asking you to go over Pathway 2 again.
Okay. So Pathway 2 is with one of those 7 screeners that are currently approved by the Oklahoma State Department or State Board of Education, that if they meet a grade level target for the end of year 3rd grade at any time during 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade, that they are exempt from that retention. We've put those grade level target scores right here on this first page of this guidance document. Those are the scores set by the vendors. Those are not scores that we've created. Those are the scores set by the vendors based on their research. Now, again, just remember that we have some students that might have met this last year in second grade under an assessment that was previously approved but is no longer, such as the DRA or Literacy First. If they had met those targets at that time and the parent was notified, hey, your student is exempt from retention, we certainly are honoring that because they have met what is required. They met that during first, second, or third grade in a year that it was on the approved list. If we're looking at for this year for our third graders, if they are meeting, like for example, a 330 on a cadence, that would be considered that grade level target as long as they meet it at some point. They don't have to still be there. We do know sometimes our students will backslide. Sometimes it is a little bit of an anomaly, but most of the time that's really about where they are. So, but with the way that has been defined by our legislators is if they meet that score once during first, second, or third grade, that they're able to be promoted.
Melissa, we have several more questions, and I think that probably we'll have to add those to the FAQ.
Absolutely. 'Cause I
But
know
we
that
do
we're
have
gonna-
one that I really thought we should address before we close out is if a student hit the 40% on the map, but just below 195, are they still to be retained unless they meet one of the 7?
So on the MAT growth, the grade level target score for end of year third grade is the 195. That's that 40th percentile. The RIT score is what MAT calls it for May. So if they are not there, then they cannot be promoted through pathway 2. So they need to next be considered for pathway 3. If they don't meet any of the exemptions, then we move forward to a student reading proficiency team. At that point, it is up to the team as to what is best for that student. So if you have that student, let's say they're consistently scoring a 191, they're really close, they're just not there yet. That team needs to get together and decide what is it that is best for the student. If we feel that it's best that we promote the student, then, and everyone agrees, then we promote the student. If we don't agree, or if we all feel that retention is best, that student does need to be retained at that point. Okay. Are there any other?
Clarification on 4th and 5th. So if a student meets 40th percentile sufficiency at any time, not the end of school grade level score, are they off probation?
Yeah, Claudia, I think so. I mean, because that's still in that grade level range. If they've met that 40th percentile, they're showing they're now in that grade level range. So that makes it a little bit different than what we're doing for the promotion. That then becomes, they're not considered that probation any longer. Thank you for bringing that up, Claudia. I appreciate you getting us there.
There was one question about if she brought her portfolios home and had them all done before spring break, could they use that?
Absolutely. And
would she need to give those to the principal?
No.
Or no?
I think that's determined by the principal at that point. What is the principal comfortable with? If the principal is comfortable with signing off on that based off of what the teacher says, absolutely. Otherwise, might need to delay until the teacher and the principal are able to get together after restrictions have been lifted.
And one other one about clarifying when the paperwork has to be completed.
And really not until we get back to, are able to get back to a normal situation, okay? I know we have so much going on that we're just frantically trying to get things done. There is nothing that says we have got to get this done very quickly. I know we want to make these decisions, but it is perfectly fine. Wait until the fall if we need to, but really the deadline would be before we start school for the 2021 school year. Okay. All right, just if we come back in August, can we give them a screener and then promote if they meet it before school starts? Yes, Byron, we can. Okay, if that's what we feel is best in the best interest for your students, absolutely, you can do that. Okay.
There was one clarifying question about good cause 4 and 5. I know we've said for good cause exemptions, we don't have to have virtual meetings. And then they thought you said that you did for good cause 4 and good cause 5.
Okay, let me clarify. We do not need to have virtual meetings for any of the good causes, okay? The principal and the superintendent have to sign off on them. That does not require a virtual meeting. And then Leanne, I was talking about Senate Bill 601 last spring. It's just the one that caused the changes on the good cause exemptions. Okay. All right, we are going to save all of the questions that are in the chat, and we will go through those. If there's something that's not already addressed on the FAQs, we will update those as soon as we can. We will have this meeting again next Tuesday. If there's anything in particular that you are finding that we really just need to spend some extra time on, please feel free to reach out. Just shoot me an email and let me know, and we will make sure that we make time for that. I do know that the recording for the last meeting that we had on March 30th can be found on our website. If you go to the instructional support, as we go through on the, it's the green scrolling, it takes you directly to this page. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, you will find the recordings that we had, not only for RSA, but for all of our initial meetings for our content areas. So there's, again, our pages are constantly being updated. I know you're getting so much information thrown at you. I really greatly appreciate you trying to figure this thing out and trying to do what's best for our kids in this very frustrating time. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help you with anything that you might need. Okay, and that being said, like I said, we'll go through those questions. If you have a question that wasn't addressed and you didn't get it in the chat, just shoot me an email and we'll get it taken care of, and we will continue to add on to those FAQs for you. Otherwise, everybody stay healthy, stay warm on this chilly day. Go hug your loved ones and go get some rest. Bye and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ladies, I am saving our chat.
I saved it too.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end our meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
We will chat later. If I can figure out. Here, stop share. There we go.
Bye, ladies.
Bye-bye.
Amazing job. So helpful.
Thank you.